All right, so we're continuing with the Bible flyover here, and as you can see there, it's Torah Part 4. Now, I think we're going to end up with like Torah Part 16 eventually, because the Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and we haven't even gotten through Genesis yet. So, but we'll get there. So today is looking at the life of Joseph. So we're seeing how the families are starting to kind of get narrower and narrower in terms of the individuals that are mentioned and how much time is being spent with talking about these various individuals. So pardon me while I. So we'll get moving here and start looking at. So you said 38. It's 37 really is where we're starting. So this is about the story of Joseph, and so we'll start kind of initially scooting quite quickly through his early sort of career, but then sort of again like we did last week, sort of take a descent, into an aspect of Joseph's life and as I read through Joseph's story, it really is a very, very exciting story. I mean, it really does make for a good reading, So it's as good as any other book, or if not better. So we're going to be looking at Joseph, and Joseph is one of the 12 sons of Jacob. Okay, and as we saw last week, that Jacob had that encounter with God at Bethel, and but he was there, but he didn't know it, and then that's where he had the vision of the ladder going up and down to heaven, and angels going up and down on it. And then later on, he had that encounter at Peniel with the man that he was wrestling with, who was a pre-incarnate form of the Lord Jesus Christ, I believe. So that was what we called a Christophany. And so we talked about how Peniel was a place of solitude because he was there on his own. It was a place of struggle. It was a place of hanging in there. It was a place of blessing, but it was a place of change because his name was changed from Jacob to Israel. So, and it's interesting as you read through the rest of Genesis, you'll see Jacob being mentioned with that particular name, but he's also mentioned as Israel as well. But the times that he's mentioned as Israel is generally when he's doing well and he's trusting God, because that's what the name means, Prince of God. But see, when he's backpedaling and messing about, then he's Jacob. He's kind of going back to the old thing. So God wants us to move and mature and expand. And we were speaking about these things last night up at a meeting last night in Portadown, and there was a real sense of God's Spirit there, just wanting to really help people change. Go from being the Jacob, being the one that is a deceiver. And being changed then to being the Prince of God. So Joseph is the son of Rachel. So there was 4 women in the house. There was 2 wives and two concubines. Okay, sort of maidservants. And sometimes people would say, well, doesn't that justify polygamy? Meaning a man having more than one wife. And the Bible never condones polygamy. It kind of puts up with it, but there's never really a good example of polygamy in the Bible, even though it was something that was practiced. And really, God's design is to have one man, one woman. That's how that's supposed to work. But in this particular house, there was 4 of them, and Joseph was the son of Rachel, who was the chosen, the one that Jacob loved. So So in chapter 37 here we have Joseph who is favored by Jacob, and Jacob gives him a multicolored coat, as some of the Bible translations would put it, or a long-sleeved coat. And what that would indicate is basically, if you have long sleeves, that means you're not working. Unlike the other brothers, they were out in the field and they were out shepherding their sheep and doing whatever they needed to do. They wouldn't have had a long sleeve coat because that wouldn't have been practical in those terms. But Joseph was given this position of being favored by having a nice coat. And I think was it the Andrew Lloyd Webber's the Joseph in the Technicolor dream coat, and all that stuff. So, but Joseph has dreams, and he has dreams about how his brothers and his mother and father are going to be bowing down before him in a future time. And he has two of these dreams, and he relays these dreams to the brothers. He's only 17 years of age at this particular stage, and the brothers aren't terribly impressed. They don't like hearing about how they may be subservient to Joseph. So what they do is they take Joseph and they throw him into a pit. They concoct a plan about what they're going to do with him. They're all arguing, about what they're going to do. Some of them want to kill him. Some of them want to sell him on. Some of them want to, there's all kinds of things. So they basically decide that what they'll do is they'll not kill him, but they'll tell Jacob that Joseph actually got killed. And so they take his robe of many colors and they they kill a goat, and they take the blood of that animal and spread it all over the coat. And then they take the coat down to Jacob and say, dear love, your son, he got in a tussle there with an animal, and here's his coat. We're really sorry. But what they actually did was they sold him to the Midianites, who then sold him down to Egypt. So from Jacob's perspective, Joseph is dead, but it's a big fat lie. Okay, so there's a lot of hard family dynamics when it comes to Joseph's family here. So that's chapter 37. Chapter 38 then deviates from the narrative about Joseph a bit, talking about the sin of Judah with Tamar, and this is where Tamar pretends to be a prostitute, and Judah then has a liaison with her, and it's kind of a creepy chapter, so we'll not spend an awful lot of time talking about it, but there's a lot of different. Judah has a couple of sons who end up sinning. God judges them, and they're taken out. So it's and Onan, I think, is those particular sons' names. But it's kind of strange because it's through Judah that the Messiah comes, and here we have Judah who's being quite a kind of not a great character. And now in chapter 39, then Joseph is sold into Potiphar's house. And he gains a good reputation with Potiphar, and Potiphar, I would say, is the head of their MI5, of Egypt of that time. He's the captain of the guard. He's a man of great responsibility. But Joseph demonstrates himself as a trustworthy, worthwhile servant, and that's because God's with him, and Joseph is keeping his eyes on the Lord. But at that particular time, there is temptation with Potiphar's wife. And what you have to understand back then is that an Egyptian man quite often was older when he got married to usually younger women. So I would say Potiphar could have been in his 40s and Mrs. Potiphar was probably about 18. Okay, so a bit of robbing the cradle, you know. So, now Joseph at this particular time is 17 or 18 years old when he's sold into the thing. So now Potiphar's wife is then kind of slinking around the house and wanting to basically give herself to Joseph because Joseph is better looking than maybe Potiphar, you know, being an older sort of man and probably away quite a lot. But Joseph, you know, does not succumb to this temptation. He puts his hand up and says, look, I can't be sinning against God and doing this thing. You know, my master has given me everything into my hand, into my responsibility, except you, because you're his wife. I don't have anything to do with you. And so he understood his boundaries. And there's a lot of good things that one can learn about temptation. But then he ends up being framed because the girl then keeps on pushing the boat out and saying, would you sleep with me, sleep with me, sleep with me? And then, and so he runs away from that situation, but she grabs his coat and manages to keep his coat until Potiphar gets home. And then Potiphar, she says, look, he tried to, you know, make a mockery of me, and I yelled and I shouted and roared and all this kind of stuff. So Joseph then gets imprisoned as a result of that. And really, Potiphar, if he wanted to, because he was a slave, could have very easily put Joseph to death, but he doesn't. And I think that's because he knew what his wife was at, you know. So, but to be seen, to be doing the right thing and doing the just thing, he throws him into the clink. But Joseph remains faithful to God. And then in chapter 40, we have there's a baker and a butler that are Pharaoh's baker and butler. So these were men that were working in the royal household, and they were found to be doing wrong, so they were imprisoned. Joseph is in there, and again gains, you know, great respect and responsibility with the jailer in there, and basically he says to Joseph, look, take care of the rest of these guys, I'll go and have a cup of tea. And but there's these two men in there who have dreams, and Joseph then interprets these dreams. And so Joseph is gifted by God to interpret these things. So so the butler has a dream about how he's going to be restored back into the royal household, and the baker kind of overhears this thing and says, "Boy, I've had a dream too, and it sounds a bit similar. I'll tell Joseph my dream, and hopefully I'll get back into the royal household." But his interpretation was completely opposite. And it ended up that the baker was then executed based on what his dream was about. So, but the butler, Joseph then says to the butler, would you remember me when you get out? And the last verse of chapter 40 says, but he forgot him. And I remember I was in one of my meetings back home, and one of the elders was speaking at the Lord's table, and he actually cited that particular verse about how easy it is to forget the Lord. And so the butler forgot about Joseph, and Joseph ended up remaining in the prison for another 2 years. And but it was just interesting just to think, you know, how easy it is to be caught up in a lot of things of life and forget the person that actually helped you. So because there's a lot of parallels of Joseph when it comes to the things of God. So but then Pharaoh has a dream, and the butler then says, oh, right, I know a guy. I was in prison, and he interpreted my dream. He might be a good fellow to talk to. Now, this is 2 years down the road here. So Joseph is then brought in to interpret Pharaoh's dream, which is about 7 years worth of good growth and plenty and harvest and all these sorts of things. But then there's going to be another 7 years where there is going to be a famine. And so the Pharaoh is quite disturbed about this and says, well, we need to make preparations in order to deal with this famine that's going to be coming along. Who's a good guy to actually talk to about this, and who would organize this? And so Joseph was the logical sort of pick because of just what he had said to Pharaoh at that time in terms of what he needed to do in order to deal with this. Now, if you go to Egypt today and you look at some of the storage containers that were built, they were built in and around Joseph's time. And so Joseph would have said, look, we're going to collect grain over this period of the 7 years, and we're going to keep it. And so when we have these 7 years of famine, then we'll be able to distribute food so that people will not starve at that time. So he was then made governor, and there was no one above Joseph except for Pharaoh himself. And so this is one of the few times really where Egypt is sort of seen as a place that's a place of protection, as opposed to like a place of sin and of slavery, because much of the time in the Bible, Egypt is always seen as a parallel to the old life, So Joseph then gets married to an Egyptian girl called I think it's Asenath or something like that, and they have 2 children, Manasseh and Ephraim, and those 2 men then eventually become part of the 12 tribes that have land. Okay, so because Joseph is sort of removed out of that equation, but his 2 sons then get respective inheritances, and Levi is not given a land inheritance, but he is the one that is the tribe of the priesthood. So in terms of land, there's still 12. It just happens to be 10 of them are for the sons of Jacob, and then 2 of them are the grandsons. Okay, so that would be Manasseh and Ephraim. So now we're going to start slowing down here a little bit and looking at chapter 42 of Joseph, because this starts to get into why God brought Joseph there to begin with. Okay, because sometimes, we look at our life and we would go, why are certain things happening? Why is there heartache? Why is there difficulty? Why does it keep on going round in circles? And I don't know what's happening. And I would imagine that Joseph, through the number of years that he was in prison, or, well, first of all, being kicked around by his brothers and disregarded, and then sold on to slavery, being a slave for a long time, and then in prison over the head of something that didn't happen. And so I would imagine that Joseph, we sort of get this idea that Joseph, never doubted God. Well, I think if he was a man, he probably did, somewhere along the line. And we have to remember too that Joseph did not have a Bible. There was nothing written down at this particular stage. The only thing that may have been written at this point very possibly could have been the book of Job, because Job is the earliest book that is recorded in the Bible, even though it sits in the middle of the Bible. Job, as an individual, was a man from about the same time as Abraham. So that narrative that's written about Job could have, I'm not saying that it was, but it could have been written by that particular stage, and that may have been the only piece of writing that they would have had about God. So now whether they had much access to it is another issue, but really Joseph didn't have the Bible as we have it today. I mean, we have a huge privilege of having this book. You know, we look at the men of old, the women of old back in the Old Testament and say, boy, they were spiritual superstars. They didn't even have the Bible. You know, so for Joseph to trust God was a huge thing, you know, and but I think Joseph then, as he became essentially prime minister of Egypt, was then starting to say, this is why God's brought me here. You know, God's brought me here to preserve life, to understand dreams, and you know, and I'm sure that he never ever thought in a million years that he would be doing this kind of work.
Sorry, what do you think? God was a bit more direct with people back then, given that they didn't have the Bible.
Well, yes, I would say, you know, God revealed himself in a very direct way, because, you know, it says, and the word of the Lord came to Abraham or came to Isaac or came to Jacob saying, you know, so yeah, I would say that they were left in no doubt as to the revelation, but that stuff wasn't penned down. You know, there wasn't a scroll that's because really it was Moses eventually that was the writer of these things. So now there's a lot of oral tradition, and you know how all these things were then passed down from generation to generation, and it was under Moses that these things were actually penned. So
history reading, most of the things that we were reading in the Bible, there were evident there, so we think that's why God was more prominent, because then they are all down the line in the book.
very possibly, yeah. So you know, because you know, nowadays we don't, there's no extra revelation, you know. So you know, what we have is what we have, and that's what we live by. So
Not outside of Bible times, like we're still living in those revelations, or like really?
yeah, well, yes, because there's obviously a lot of things that have not happened yet, you know. So we're still, yeah, in the we're not outside of it in that sense. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Gas is we're living it, but some of us, you know, a lot of the world, sin in the world, we're not as outside with God.
Yeah.
As we're then in the Habit Bible.
Yes, and that's a very interesting observation. You know, it's like these people were very much in touch with God, and yet we have the Bible today, and we're not in touch with God. You know, so and that's why you need to know the Word of God, because that's how God speaks to us by His Spirit. You know, God's Spirit takes the Word of God, applies it to our heart and our situation. You know, so but if we don't know the Word of God, or we're not taught the Word of God, then we're not going to know the will of God, and then we're going to be running around like a bunch of whirligigs in a pond, you know, just going, you know, just bouncing around. So, so Jacob, at the beginning of chapter 42, sends 10 sons to Egypt to buy grain, but he does not send Benjamin. Okay, because Benjamin is the youngest, and he is the remaining son of Rachel. Okay, so Jacob loves Rachel. Rachel died in childbirth, giving birth to Benjamin. So Benjamin is very, very special, you know. So because every time Jacob looks at Benjamin, he sees Rachel. You know, he sees the woman whom he loved. You know, and so this is hard. You know, and I think we can appreciate that. So, but he, you know, he's lost in his mind. He's lost Joseph, so that's the older son of Rachel. So that's bad. So, but he's dead. He's gone in Jacob's mind. So when he sends the other sons, he's going, I ain't sending Benjamin. No way. Jacob.
Yeah.
Yes, I would say he really struggled with it. Yeah. So, so as the sons, or now the brothers, really, they have then their first encounter with Joseph as they're going down to buy grain. And so Joseph is very much part of this exercise of selling grain to the surrounding nations, because the famine is not just located in Egypt, it is located in the known world. So there was, you know, either a bad drought bad insects or war, or, you know, I don't know what, but anyway, there ain't no food. Okay, so people are then coming to Egypt because they know that there's a stockpile of grain there and we can get stuff. So they would have had to travel a fair distance, you know, from Israel to you know, the Nile Valley there, or the Nile Delta, where Joseph would have been living. So, you know, we're talking about a few hundred miles. Now, when you're riding on a donkey, that's tough. Okay, so Wendy, I don't, you don't have donkeys, do you? Or do you have a donkey? Oh, you used to have a donkey. You have a donkey. Okay, so have you ever ridden your donkey?
No, the youngsters have.
Oh, right. Okay, so, but can you imagine riding down to Cork
Not, no.
on your donkey? You know, so that would be probably kind of a what this would be like, you know, with bags hanging off and you're going boing, 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 you know. So, but Joseph recognizes the brothers. They don't recognize him. He speaks kind of roughly to them and says, you know, where are you boys from? You know, what are you all doing? You know, is this all of you? You know, and he asks some very, very pointed questions and, you know, comes across as being kind of this rough, upset man. But so what Joseph then does is he accuses the brothers of being spies. He says, you're down here to see the nakedness of the land. You're trying to find things and do things, and then you're going to report it back to your country, and that's going to cause us a lot of problems. You people are spies. That's what you are. And so the brothers are going, no, we're not spies. We're just our dad's back there, and so you know, so there's this information that then comes up to Joseph about Jacob being alive and about Benjamin still back there and that kind of thing. So, but Joseph is doing this deliberately. Now, what happens here is that Reuben remembers the wrong of selling Joseph. Now, Joseph hears this and he ends up excusing himself to go and weep. Now, they don't realize that he understands because Joseph is speaking to them in Egyptian. Okay, so because he has, you know, he's coming across as an Egyptian person. He knows their language, he knows Hebrew and all that sort of stuff, but he's not coming across like that. So they're all talking to themselves, going, you know, reason we're being accused and all that kind of stuff. You know what we did to Joseph? That, you know, God's getting us back. That's what's happening. So, but Joseph hears this, and the reason he weeps is he realizes that his brothers are, you know, they understand the wrong that they've done. So, and I think this is the thing that Joseph is wanting to see if this is true. You know, whether the brothers are actually penitent of what they did to Joseph. So, so Simeon, which is one of the sons of Leah, the first wife. Okay, because there was Reuben, and there was Simeon, Levi, and then Judah. I think so. Simeon, I think, is either the second or the third son. But anyway, he is kept behind basically as a bargaining piece. You know, he's kept back as a hostage. So Simeon is kept, and then what happens is the brothers then go back, and then they realize that all the money that they had paid Joseph for the grain, Joseph actually sticks all the money back in their bags, and now that gets them a bit worried because they're like, what happened here? How this happened? Why do we have our money? That shouldn't have happened, you know, because we want to buy this stuff at a fair price and, you know, be good about it. So, but nonetheless, Simeon is kept behind. And then, so Jacob is very upset because Joseph tells the brothers, look, I'm keeping Simeon, you go back and you get your little brother and bring him, because otherwise you'll see my face no more. So you need to go and get him. Now Joseph knows how important Benjamin is, to Jacob, and this is going to cause a bit of a conversation. So Jacob is bereaved because in his mind, Joseph is gone, Joseph is dead. Now Simeon is gone. He's in custody back in Egypt, doesn't know whether he's going to ever see him again. And now the brothers want to take Benjamin, and in his head, he's going, Benjamin's cooked. That, you're going to take Benjamin, they're going to keep him. I'm going to, so this is bad crack for Jacob. So this is chapter 42 as Joseph is starting to deal with his brothers in terms of bringing about some kind of restoration. Now, chapter 43 is then getting into more kinds of negotiations between Joseph and his brothers. So now Judah warns that Benjamin must go back, because he says quite emphatically, he says, if we go back without Benjamin, the man told us, we're not going to see him, and we're not getting anything, and we'll not get Simeon and any of that kind of thing. So we got to do what this man says. Now, it's interesting what is said here in chapter 43, verses 8 to 10. It says, then Judah said to Israel, his father, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. I myself will be surety for him. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. For if we had not lingered, surely by now we would have returned the second time. And now, the reason I'm highlighting Judah here is because Judah is that person through which the Messiah comes. And so we're starting to see, again, another scarlet thread in the scriptures here, because what Judah is saying here in verse 9, he says, I myself will be surety for him. So I will guarantee his safety. And if he doesn't come back, then let me bear the blame forever. So Judah has taken this position of, I will guarantee Benjamin's safety. I will, and because he has a real heart for Benjamin for whatever reason. And and as we start to get through this, we'll start to see more about how Judah is interceding and doing that which the Messiah does. And it's interesting then the relationship that he has with Benjamin, and how that relationship actually continues through the Old Testament, even into the New Testament, or sorry, from the Old Testament to the New Testament. So Jacob sends the sons along with Benjamin, and he sends presents. They send pistachios and nuts and and spices and all kinds of stuff back with them, and sends double the money back to Egypt, because all that money that they had paid got stuck back in their sacks, and so they don't think this is right. So they're taking that money along with a whole pile of other money in order to buy more grain. Okay, so they're not wanting to look at this as a freebie. So they're gonna go on back here. But there is something about Judah saying, and it's interesting there. It says Judah said to Israel his father. Didn't say to Jacob his father. It said to Israel. So this is this is where you start to see this sense of change. That this is because if this was Jacob his father, Jacob would then be trying to connive and maneuver around, saying, how can we negotiate this a little bit differently here? But it's not talking to Jacob, it's talking to Israel. And Israel is one who trusts God, and he's trusting his son Judah to do what's right. So, and then and then when they do get down to Egypt, then Joseph entertains the brothers. They are brought into the royal household. An animal is killed for them. Bread is set in front of them, and their donkeys get fodder and all these kinds of. So they're really treated quite literally royally, So, but Joseph then sees Benjamin, and then he has to go and excuse himself, and he weeps in his chamber. And the Bible says that he ends up having to wash his face because he, doesn't want to be seen as actually recognizing them at this particular stage. But he's seeing that the brothers are starting to do what's required here, and Benjamin is brought. So that is chapter 43. And again, what I would encourage you to do is go and look at these chapters and read through it and read through the whole thing. Read through it as a big story. So now, so we continue on in chapter 43. And Joseph and the brothers, they actually dine separately, because it says that the Egyptians don't eat with Hebrew people, because the Egyptians didn't like sheep. They thought sheep were like really dirty animals, so they didn't sort of entertain sheep really. They had other sorts of animals. So sitting with people that shepherded sheep and all that kind of stuff was kind of like sitting with the riffraff. But Joseph is not saying that, but in his culture, as he was in the Egyptian culture, we sit and eat separately. Okay. But it's interesting that they are also seated in order by birthright to their astonishment. So because when you have a Christmas dinner, you put little name cards. I don't know if we all do this, but we do this. We put little name cards down on the table as to who sits where, and or even at a wedding reception or something like that. There's the place names and all that sort of stuff. So now they would have thought that Joseph had absolutely no idea about them, other than they says, oh, we have a dad back there and we also have a little brother. So that's all the information that they thought Joseph understood. But Joseph knows them. They don't know that yet, but so what he does is he then seats them in order, which is to demonstrate that he does know them, and they're kind of quite astonished that that has taken place. And Benjamin receives 5 times more food than all the other brothers, and so because Joseph, that's his wee brother. The other ones are half brothers, but this is his little brother. And, I would imagine that Joseph, back in the days when he was a slave and imprisoned and that kind of thing, probably thought, I will never, ever, ever see my family ever again. But yet he continues to remain faithful to God, because he knows that God is sovereign. And, the Hebrews understood something about God that was very, very different than the other gods. Okay, the other gods of the land were gods that were limited. They were regional, meaning that in Canaan they had their Baals and their Ashtaroths and all that stuff, and Egypt had their gods, Ra and a whole plethora of things. So all the nations all had their regional gods, and all their pantheon of gods were all limited in their power, and they were all jockeying for position and all that silliness, And so we know that idols have no power and that kind of thing. Joseph, he's worshiping the true God. He's worshiping the God that is sovereign over all of the universe. Yes.
That's what I was thinking earlier, when Joseph was asking the brother to bring young Benjamin, that would have put a lot of pressure on the father. But
yeah,
Joseph really knew that God was with him,
yes,
and the father.
Yep.
That would kill any person,
Yeah.
To bring their wee brother to Joseph.
Yeah.
Cause they didn't know it was Joseph. Was doing
No,
it.
they didn't know that
You
at
know
that particular stage, yeah.
what I mean? The father,
And that would have taken a lot of faith on the father's part.
God was with
Mhm.
Joseph and
Yep.
Jacob.
Yeah,
Am I right?
absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Young man of 18,
Yeah,
would Benjamin have been born?
yes, uh-huh. Yeah.
He was one that must have been in the whole way, but we found out. Probably.
Yes, uh-huh. If I remember that correctly, yeah, so. Mhm.
So then were the other brothers, was the concubines their mother?
Yeah, there was the first wife, Leah, which was a legitimate wife. That was the one that Laban had sort of swapped out.
Yes.
So that was a wife. And then he worked for Rachel for another 7 years. So both of those women both had maids, both had female servants. And a common practice back then was, you have kids with them too.
Yes.
So there were half brothers, yeah. So Benjamin was a full brother of Joseph. So
Probably Benjamin, the next side. Yes.
yeah.
Benjamin probably would know him, Joseph, I remember.
Well, yeah, he could have been maybe just a wee tote, or we're not really told what we do know in terms of ages is that Joseph was 17 when he was pitched into the hole. Okay, that we know. Some of the other ages of people and stuff like that, you sort of have to calculate, using different sorts of means and methods. When Isaac was being sacrificed by Abraham, a lot of people sort of think that Isaac was, a wee boy. It was, he was likely 37. Now, for a man to be bound by his 136-year-old dad, to be put on an altar and acquiesce to that, that's really something else, so it's very interesting. He said, but what Isaac realized about Abraham was that Abraham had said to the men as they were leaving them off and going on to worship God, Abraham says to the men, I and the lad will go yonder and worship. And he says, we will return. Now, the instruction from God at that particular stage was that you sacrifice Isaac on a mountain that I'm going to show you. Now, so in Abraham's mind, he's going, I am going to kill him. Okay, but the conclusion that he comes to in that thinking, as we read in Hebrews 11, is that Abraham reckoned that God would have to raise him from the dead because the promise came through Isaac. So, and Isaac hadn't any kids yet. So the only conclusion, legitimate, logical conclusion that Abraham came to was, well, then God has to raise him from the dead. And that was extraordinary because nobody had ever been raised from the dead up to that point. Nobody. So there was no precedent for it, so, but yeah, absolutely. So, so when they're on their way, Isaac then makes this comment. He says, Father, we have wood and we have fire, but where is the sacrifice? And so that's where Abraham says, God himself will provide a lamb for the sacrifice. And so they continued on together. And so I think that perhaps Abraham would have said to Isaac, look, you're going to be on the altar there. I'm going to have the knife and all this kind of stuff. And if I kill you, God's going to have to raise you from the dead. That's what's going to happen. They both had faith, so both of these men were extraordinary men of faith, so.
Further, you see that the two brothers, Benjamin and Joseph,
Yeah.
they were the two that their father loved,
Yes.
Joseph loved,
Yes.
because they were Rachel's.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So now going into chapter 44, we have then this issue with the cup. Okay, so now we'll just work our way through this particular part of the story. So the sacks are after their dinner. Okay, the sacks are filled with grain, and the money that they brought is all put back into their mouth of their sacks. So they haven't spent a penny, you know. And then Joseph's cup, his special silver cup, okay, was placed in Benjamin's sack. Okay, so this was again, Joseph making a plan here of how he was going to, I would say, reveal himself eventually. And the brothers then leave to travel home. So they're all happy. Benjamin's with them, you know, and that makes them very, very happy, because that means they will get home. And they also have Simeon, and everybody's there, and we're going to get back to Jacob, and Jacob's going to be happy, and so on. Sorry about that. So at least I can look at my watch and see who's ringing. You know, so they're on their way back home. Now, what Joseph then does is he instructs the servants to catch up with the brothers, and then he accuses them of stealing the cup. Now, the cup isn't revealed yet, but they were saying, you know, why are you doing evil to our master here? You know, you've taken the cup. No, we haven't taken the cup, you know. And so then they all put their bags down and go and rummage around in their bags. And they agree that if the cup is found, they will return as slaves. You know, so that you know that they're just going to go, well, I don't know how this happened, but this is what we're going to have to do. So Benjamin is found with the cup, and the brothers tear their clothes in grief. They're going, how can we even think about going back to dad? Because actually what was then agreed was whoever has the cup, he goes back and becomes a slave, and the rest of them can go free. You know, talk about a sinking feeling. I mean, they were way up here, a couple of verses before that, and now they're, you know, straight down to the bottom. Now, this is what Judah does. And we'll read this part of the story. So Joseph says that Benjamin must stay, the others can go home. But Judah intercedes for Benjamin. And this is a lovely, lovely story about intercession. And again, this is this bit of the Old Testament that builds this whole redemption thing, this whole thing about what the Messiah will eventually do. So we'll just work through this particular, I want to read this part of the story instead of just summarizing it for you. So it says, then Judah came near to him, meaning Joseph, and said, "Oh, my Lord, please let your servant speak a word in my Lord's hearing, and do not let your anger burn against your servant, for you are even like Pharaoh. My Lord asked his servants, saying, have you a father or a brother? And we said to my Lord, we have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age, who is young, and his brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him. And then you said to your servants, bring him down to me, that I may set my eyes on him. And we said to my Lord, the lad cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father, the father would die. But you said to your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you shall see my face no more. And so it was when they went up to your servant, my father, that we told him the words of my Lord. And our father said, go back and buy us a little food. But we said, we cannot go down if our youngest brother is not with us. and then we will go down, for we will not see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. And then your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons, and then one went out from me, and says, surely he was torn to pieces. So this is a reference then to what the brothers had, said to the father about Joseph being killed by an animal. And I have not seen him since. But if you take this one also from me, and calamity befalls him, you shall bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave. Now, therefore, when I come to your servant, my father, and the lad is not with us, since his life is bound up in the lad's life, it will happen when he sees that the lad is not with us, that he will die. So your servants will bring down the gray hair on your servant, our father, with sorrow to the grave. And this is the important verses here. Verse 32, for your servant became surety for the lad to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father forever. Now, therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad as a slave to my lord, and let the lad go up with his brothers. For how shall I go up to my father if the lad is not with me, lest perhaps I see the evil that would come upon my father? And so this is what Christ would eventually do, is that because Jesus comes from Judah, and he has a great love for his brother, he says, look, take me instead. And that is what Christ has done for us. Christ has come in our stead. Instead of us continuing on in slavery to sin, Jesus says, take me instead. And now, the Jews of old would have understood this story, and they would have understood that this was about the Messiah that was to come many thousands of years later on. But this whole story here and this relationship that there was between Judah and Benjamin is played out in other scriptures, and I'm going to highlight two things to finish up today, and that is, I want to look at 2 Samuel 9. Verses 1 to 13. And again, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read this to you so that you can see what's happening here. So now it says, now David said, is there still anyone who is left in the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? Now let me just stop there and fill in the gaps. David is from the tribe of Judah. Okay. It is, and Jesus is referred to as the son of David. Okay, so Jesus is in the line of David. So Saul, who had a son called Jonathan, Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin, and obviously his son Jonathan is from the tribe of Benjamin. David and Jonathan were good buddies. They were very, very close. And but Saul died at the end of his reign on the battlefield. He ended up killing himself. Jonathan also died in that battle as well. And so what David is now saying is, is there still anyone who is left in the house of Saul that I may show kindness for Jonathan's sake? So there's this relationship here between Judah and Benjamin, because David is part of Judah, Saul or Jonathan, more specifically, is from the tribe of Benjamin. And we'll see who he's going to have mercy on here, or kindness toward. So it says, and there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba. So when they called him to David, the king said to him, are you Ziba? And he said, at your service. And then the king said, is there not still someone in the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God? Now, this is the second time that the word kindness is mentioned, and we'll highlight that in a minute. And Ziba said to the king, is there still a son of Jonathan, or there is still a son of Jonathan who is lame in his feet? So the king said to him, where is he? And Ziba said to the king, indeed, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, in Lodebar. And then the king sent and brought him out from the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, from Lodebar. Now, when Mephibosheth, okay, that's the name of this son, that's a big mouthful, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, had come to David, he fell on his face and prostrated himself. And then David said, Mephibosheth. And he answered, here is your servant. So David said to him, do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan your father's sake, and will restore to you all the land of Saul your grandfather, and you shall eat bread at my table continually. And then he bowed himself and says, what is your servant that you should look upon such a dead dog as I? Now, you have to realize that Mephibosheth here, even though he is the son of what used to be a royal sort of person, is severely disabled. Disabled people back then didn't cut the grade. You know, they were treated badly, as some unfortunately are treated today. And but what David wants to do, David representing the Messiah, you know, he's the one that has all things in his hand. He is the one that's able to exhibit kindness. And he looks upon Mephibosheth, who sees himself as nothing more than a dead dog. But he wants to exercise kindness toward him. So kindness is used here a number of times. This is the word in Hebrew, hased, which talks about protection. It talks about support for those that are poor and weak. Mephibosheth is very, very weak. He can't even stand on his own 2 feet. And but yet David, in his love for the sake of Jonathan, his love for Judah's love for Benjamin, as it were, he desires to not only show kindness to him, but he says there in verse 7, it says, you shall eat bread at my table continually. You know, and that means he's going to be treated as the king's son. You know, so this, you know, because Saul was who he was, and he was always running after David and trying to kill him and all that kind of thing, you know, David would have had the perfect right just to say, see anybody in Saul's house? No, I am not going there. I don't want them, because they just remind me of a lot of heartache. But yet David is not of that disposition. He's having a thing from within God that says, go and show kindness. And it goes on here and says, then the king called to Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, I have given to your master's son all that belongs to Saul and to all his house. You therefore and your sons and your servants shall work the land for him, and you shall bring in the harvest, that your master's son may have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's son, shall eat bread at my table always. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. And then Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king has commanded his servants, so will your servant do. And as for Mephibosheth, said the king, he shall eat at my table like one of the king's sons. And Mephibosheth was a young son whose name was, had a young son whose name was Micah, and all who dwelt in the house of Ziba were servants of Mephibosheth. And so Mephibosheth dwelt in Jerusalem, and he ate continually at the king's table, and he was lame in both his feet. You know, and it's a wonderful story, really, about not only a king exercising kindness to a disabled man, but it is, again, this picture that the Jews understood. This is what the Messiah will do. The Messiah will come, and the Messiah will deal with people that can't help themselves. None of us can help ourselves. We're all in a position where we can't even lift a finger. We can't deal with our own sin. We can't be good enough to impress God. We're just not there. And so the Jews understood David, who's from Judah, is reaching out to Benjamin and taking his place. And just to finish up, because next week we'll then talk about how then Joseph then reveals himself to the brothers. But in the New Testament, does anybody know who's from Benjamin? In terms of
Saul.
Yep, Saul, who would then become Paul. So he had a great relationship with somebody who was the son of David, and that was the Lord Jesus Christ. So even into the New Testament, there's this relationship between Judah and Benjamin, and the closeness that is there. So Jesus loved Paul. Paul in a lot of ways was a disabled man. Now, he wasn't disabled physically, but he was disabled spiritually. He was disabled with legalism and all kinds of crazy nonsense. And yet Jesus Christ reached out to him and says, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? It's hard to kick against the goads and all those kinds of things. But he converts him. And you know what? Paul sat at the Lord's table, not the communion table, but he sat at the king's table, just as Mephibosheth sat at David's table. And consequently, we sit at the Lord's table now. And we can sit there forever.
Saul was down the generation from David.
King Saul was the first king of Israel, but when he kind of royally messed up, God then raised up David, who was from a completely different tribe. He was from Judah. Now Saul was from Benjamin.
That was always the plan, really, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We were always supposed to come
Through
through
your
here.
history class and give me the ballad to play.
So now in the New Testament, obviously we're talking about Saul, who then became Paul. That was a different sort of Saul. Okay. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Dare say David say them to play it over and
So
over.
anyway, she needs a CD. Yeah. So
Not fast, but now just.
right.
Mine, bro.
So, but so that's where we'll park this for now. So we'll then get into chapter 45, where Joseph then reveals himself to his brothers and see the blessings there.
Family history thing, who belong to who belong to who.
Yes, we can do that. That would probably bring a bit of clarity to what's going on, like a family tree. Yes, okay. So we'll help to sort that out. Yes, no
Sorry,
problem.
but
I had a big poster in my room when I was growing up. My mother got it for me. It was called the Bible family tree or something like that. But anyway, at the top of it was Adam and Eve, and every name in the Bible was on this family tree, and it was just all cascade. I don't have it anymore. So yeah. So, but then at the end of it came Christ. I know, but well, we can get these things, So I don't personally have it anymore, but we can certainly go and break it up.
Not have it.
No, my dad,
What are you doing to this?
anyway, I'll have to stop the recording here.